How many kids do you have?
I have two.
Okay, he's the younger.
He's the oldest.
Older.
He's going to college in a few weeks.
Oh, wow, where?
Whitman College.
Okay, yeah.
In
Yeah, yeah.
And then my daughter is a sophomore
In high school.
in high school. She is studying this fall.
Right now.
Right now.
Time of year. Yeah, I also have two, but I have two daughters.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they're older.
Yeah. Did I hear you say something maybe about grandkids?
Pockets as I can.
Yeah.
So I had a credit card and cash. It was the first book talk on my first book.
Test, one.
And then I remember there was a
Solomon.
Solomon? Got it. Okay. Oh, yeah, I hear it now. I didn't hear it before. Now I hear it now.
He just got confirmed last week.
Oh, wow.
He did such a good job. Oh my gosh, my heart just like fell out of my body. It's really sweet.
Yeah, that's great.
Really, really sweet.
You get knocks from your children occasionally.
Yeah.
It's the payoff for all the aggravation.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sit down
Yes.
because
And
you're.
Rabbi will introduce.
Yeah.
And then I will introduce somebody.
Okay. And I'm going to shut this off so I can gossip without it going public.
Can you turn it off and he leaves it on? He'll turn it off.
Okay. Okay, so I've left it on.
Erev Tov. It is wonderful to see all of you here. For those of you who have not been to Temple Beth before, I am Rabbi Karen Gorbin, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. Just a few housekeeping things. If you need the restrooms, they are around the corner over here, sort of tucked in behind things. And there is also a water fountain in the wing between the bathrooms. And if you need an exit, there are emergency exits out through I usually have a lapel mic so I can do it with both hands, but I don't today, and it's very strange. And if you need anything else, feel free to come ask me. I'm going to turn this over to Bonnie Becker, who has really done an incredible job of putting this event together with very little assistance from the staff, and I very much appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Gorbin, for welcoming us. Welcome to all the guests. We have a bunch of folks here from Olympia, which is very cool, so welcome to TBE. So to begin in the spirit of Mussar, I want to start with the Midah of gratitude. Tonight was made possible by our whole community. We had over 20 people make financial contributions, which allowed us to make this event free and accessible to our community and beyond. Equally important, we had about as many people, some of the same people, give the gift of their time and talent. Specifically, I'd like to thank Aaron Peterson, Adria Farber, Brad Steinfeld, Deborah Eisen, Deborah Lilligren Espinosa, Erit Bloom, Erica Shirk, Fred Wernick, Jenilyn Van Vechten, John Barnes, Julia Walsh, Carrie Geffen, Liz Zitron, Maddie Plumer, Melissa Brooks, Melissa Medved, Peter and Solomon Selkin, Sam Steiner, Sonia Hanstead, Stacy Saltoff, and Suzanne Leichman. So you can hear how many people helped out. The TBE Program Fund, Special Programs Fund, also contributed quite a bit. I particularly want to call out the help of Marlene Motola and Connie Person, who kept me sane and took care of a bunch of last-minute things, which was very helpful. Becca and Olivia, Rabbi and Dr. C. Markham Investigation, we have Scott out there who is protecting us today, and we're very appreciative. Everyone who brought food and drink, and that reminds me, please stay after for a nosh because there is an extreme amount of food. And thank you to Peter for organizing a lot of that. So thank you to the TBE family for stepping up with the Midah of Zerazut, with energy, generosity, and heart to make this night a reality. I want to just take a moment to briefly explain why this event was so important to me personally. Every year for Secular New Year, I have a tradition of reflecting on the year that passed and setting goals for the year to come. These goals were materially focused, sometimes personal, health, home, or work-related goals. But in December of 2020, like many of you, I was at a particularly low point. I realized that I needed something more, a goal for my soul. Around that time, I came across a book called Everyday Holiness by Alan Morinis. Dr. Morinis is a Canadian anthropologist, filmmaker, and writer who is a leading voice in the contemporary revival of Mussar thinking. He founded the Mussar Institute in 2004, which continues to be the world's largest resource for Mussar education and outreach. In the very first chapter of this book, Dr. Morinis describes the practice of Mussar, which is essentially a life curriculum that is designed just for each of us. I was struck at the deep 1,000-year-old history of this way of life and how a lot of the internal struggles I was having were not that different from what people were working through centuries ago. How to find balance in traits such as humility, generosity, moderation, and patience. That book didn't just inspire me, it changed how I moved through my days. And gradually, it pulled me into a different relationship with myself and others. Since then, I've continued to study Mussar in a range of different formats, including shout out to the Sunday night reading group run by Dr. Kasorla, who couldn't be here tonight. Note the advertisement for that reading group. And I've learned that the deeper you go, the more there is to discover. What surprised me most was that this became an entry point to a deeper relationship with Judaism, moving me beyond just a cultural practice to a dynamic, ever-deepening study of Torah and the many Jewish thinkers who have wrestled with difficult ideas over millennia. This year, once again, Dr. Morinis' teachings met me where I was, through his new book, The Shabbat Effect. Being alive in 2026 is a challenge for the soul, And as we are constantly bombarded by news and entertainment, and again, Dr. Morinis reminds us of the wisdom we inherited from our ancestors. He deeply explores the gifts that Shabbat has to give us through an exploration of things like true rest and embracing enoughness. Things that are, as he says, simple but not easy, which I say that all the time at work as if I came up with it. But I'll stop there. We have an opportunity to learn about the book from the author directly. This means a great deal to me personally, to be able to welcome someone whose work has shaped my life in such a meaningful way. So please join me in welcoming to the Bima Dr. Morinis.
Thank you very much. Wow. That's humbling because, you know, I wrote Everyday Holiness. It came out in 2007, and it was at that point in my journey. Oh, I'll step back a little bit more. I just got off the I-5. I live in Vancouver, and so I could not drop off my dog before 1:15. I thought, I have enough time. And then it took me 45 minutes to get out of Vancouver. So so I had a plan to do this, to do that. All my plans kept flying out the window until I finally came here and changed in the bathroom. You know, so that was how it worked out. That wasn't the beginning of my journey, though. My journey began a whole lot earlier than that. I am typical of members of our generation in that being Jews in the second half of the 20th century meant that we were exposed to a Judaism that had no interest in the inner life of the individual. Judaism was very involved with building buildings. On my tour, this is my 45th city out of 45 on my book tour. So along the way, someone said to me, did you learn anything on this book tour? I said, yeah, I learned I'm not as young as I used to be. But I also learned the phrase chandelier Judaism, that the Jewish world in the second half of the 20th century was so involved in building large buildings, in building community organizations, JCCs, camps and schools, but what about the inner life? Where was that on the Jewish agenda? And the answer was nowhere. That wasn't what the Jewish world was interested in. The Jewish world was very concerned with the collective, the institutions of the collective and the community, and even in religious services and what goes on in our religious centers, it was all very collectivized. Everyone stands up at the same time, everyone sits down at the same time. Everyone says the same words in the same order at the same time. And that's all fine, and it's actually a great strength. If you want to know one of the reasons we're still here after 4,000 years, it's because we build great communities. Charity and community organizations and care for the needy and the elderly, and we're great at that. But the fact is that we're all unique. We're all unique souls. That's the way God made it. That's the plan. It says in the Talmud that when a human king stamps out coins, all the faces come out looking the same. But when the King of Kings stamps out faces, they all come out looking different. Voila. Note, with the two people here who are identical, please stand up. Even if you were identical twins, you're not identical. Because, you know, no one else may be able to tell them apart, but the parents always can. And we're unique individuals, and that's the way our spiritual lives are meant to be. We have our own inner reality, and as Bonnie was saying, there's nothing new in that. It's since human beings became human beings, we've had this inner life. So it was a very remarkable thing, and I know I'm absolutely not special in that. I had interest in my inner life and found no mirroring of that in the organized Jewish world that I was part of. And even at a young age, I'm talking teenage years, I was interested, maybe it was because it was the 60s, but I was interested in the inner life and spirituality, and there was no Jewish door to knock on. So I did what any good Jewish boy would do. I went to India. And I lived in India for 3 years. And even today, it's very hard to do a Buddhist meditation course that isn't led by somebody named Cornfield, Goldstein, Burstein, Schwartz, Rosenberg, Salzburg. And those are the ones that are identifiably Jewish. If you get a Green or a Harris, you're not so sure. But the Jewish world did not make available what I later come to discover was ours. The handbook, the pathway, the guideline for inner living that our people had put together was not available to us. So how many people here grew up in a Jewish household? How many people heard the word Mussar growing up? One, yeah, but you're the next generation. You're the fruit of our labor. Okay. Is the rabbi here? Oh, yeah, behind the piano. Did you have any Mussar in rabbinical college?
I heard about it.
Okay, thank you. The witness can sit down. Heard about it is not the same as studying an 1,100-year-old tradition of wisdom. At one point in my life, I was 47 years old, and things had gone extremely successful for me. I had had 47 charmed years. And then something happened that wasn't charmed. I was running a company at that time, and it collapsed. I had a business failure. And that was the first thing in my life that I had ever felt was not automatically and fully successful. I mean, I was almost to the point of thinking, here's what life is like. You're born, you succeed, you die. But then I learned that it isn't so, and that there's difficulty like that. And I had to face, or I chose to face, but I think it was in the cards to do that I had a role in the collapse of the business. It wasn't just market forces or competitor action or pricing, or I behaved in ways that were not, I took responsibility for behaving in ways that were not straight and upright. And so I was kind of stripped down at that point when I was 47. And I said to myself, you don't have a guidance system. You don't. You don't know which way to go and how to put one foot in front of the other and what's the priority and what should you avoid. And because we're not the first generation to navigate this thing called human life. And I was absolutely making it up as I went along. In fact, I made a virtue of that because my goal was to innovate, to come up with new things that nobody had done before. That was the goal. And we venerate people like that in this culture, the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks and the Richard Bransons and the people who create new out of nothing. They're kind of godlike because that's what God does, creates something out of nothing. And I was following in that mold, and then I got whacked by life, and I said, this is ridiculous. There must be guidance. And so a series of things happened that made me look at myself as a Jew. I had a completely secular upbringing. My parents were not at all interested in religion or spirituality. I was sent to a Reformed temple for a bar mitzvah, which was the most perfunctory, Hollywood-worthy bar mitzvah that you could imagine, and at which I learned nothing, learned nothing. I performed something and learned nothing. And, in all of that, there's nothing terribly unusual in my story. It turns out that it represents what a lot of people went through. But I said to myself, I'm 47 years old. I got 2 kids, thank you, on cue. I don't know if you heard Boaz squawked. I said, the Jews could not have survived 4,000 years on responsive reading alone. There had to be, that was delayed reaction. There had to be more deep wisdom for living. How could the Jews have survived generation after generation and continue to be ignoring the inner life? I thought, I must be living in a generation that's an aberration, not the rule. But I had no idea what to do with that thought. Okay, So the only thing I knew to do was to read. I was 47 years old. I didn't speak Hebrew. I didn't know the Hebrew alphabet. That's how perfunctory my bar mitzvah training had been. But I started reading. Just because I felt like I needed to fill in the gap of what it was to be a whole Jew, not just an external Jew, not just a tikkun olam Jew, not just a anti-Semitism Jew, not just an activist Jew, but a soul, a neshama, the human being at the essence of what it is to be a human being. I had no guidance on that and nowhere to turn except to read. I read and I read and I read. I read this and I read that. Because I was unguided, so I just was reading randomly. And somebody lent me a 2-volume set called Jewish Spirituality that was edited by Arthur Green. And it's an interesting compilation because he edited it. He brought in people who were experts in all different eras of Jewish life. And the book got organized chronologically. So the way it is, spirituality in the time of Abraham, spirituality in the time of Moses, spirituality of the prophets, spirituality of the temple, and working its way up. So the Mishnah, the Talmud, up to the 16th century Kabbalah in Tzfat, and then the Hasidic movement. And I was reading through this book in chronological order because I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just filling in. But I was coming from a place of real personal spiritual need because I had had a real breakage in my life, and I was looking for something that would really be authentic guidance. And so I wasn't looking for something intellectually satisfying or even interesting. I was looking for something that was healing and that would give me a sense of hope and solidity of being, how do you put one foot in front of the other when you're starting out flat on your back? I got through the whole first volume. I got through 90% of the second volume, and nothing was lighting up for me. And then I got up to the 19th century, and as far as I knew, nothing had happened in the Jewish world since in that period. But there was a chapter written by a historian on a thing called the Mussar movement, which took place in Lithuania in the mid to late 19th century. And I read that chapter, and I said, that's it. That's it. And because although it was the Mussar movement in the 19th century, it was based on a tradition which had started in the 900s. And by the next century, by the 11th century, so in other words, 1000s, a major book had been written all about the inner life seen through a Jewish lens. And you can tell it by the title of the book. It was published in 1080 in Spain by Rabbi Bachi ibn Pakuda, and it's called Duties of the Heart. And it was all entirely focused on the inner life. And of course, being a Jewish lens on the inner life, it doesn't stop with you. It's you in relationship with the wider world. Because we have never had a spirituality which isolated the individual from the community and from social responsibility and from being part of a larger entity. So when I started out by saying the Jewish world in our era was so entirely outwardly focused, that's a good thing. Except that it needs to have a counterpart of inward focus, because that's also a good thing, because we have both. If I ask you, listen to how absurd this question is. Do you have an inner life or an outer life? And because it's so absurd, Judaism needs to speak to both, but I grew up without that. And so Mussar, when I discovered Mussar, it became really apparent that that was the answer to my hypothesis at the beginning of Jewish attention to inner living of the individual. And so I began reading further and further. And it was amazing because I was very fortunate that the original article I read in that book was written by a historian. Why was that fortunate? Because it had footnotes and a bibliography. If it had been written by somebody who was a member of the community or a teacher from within the spiritual tradition, likely not as much. But the academic discipline meant that I now had a reading list. So I went to the university library This would be 1997. And I went to the university library. Just how long ago was 1997? So I pulled out the long drawer with the cards. You don't know what that is. And there was a subject heading, Mussar, under the Jewish thought heading. And there were all the books that I'd read about in the article were there in the university library catalog. Not only that, most of them were already translated into English. It was like astounding. It was like an Indiana Jones moment because I was on a hunt for myself. It was my personal search. I was doing it totally alone. And then I had come through this very narrow passageway, and there were all these books, all these writers, all these translators had taken this 1,100-year-old tradition, which didn't just start and that was it. It kept getting added to and added to and added to. And so there were books from all the centuries, from the 900s right up to the, well, at least to the 19th century, because I didn't find anything from the 20th century. Didn't bother me. I had Duties of the Heart to study. I had a book called Mesil Yesharim, Path of the Just, which was published in 1740 in Amsterdam. Orchot Tzadikim, Pathways of the Righteous. Even the titles are telling you it's all about how a person behaves in the world, who you are, how you bring that inner self into the outer and learn from the outer to take into the inner. So after 2 years of studying on my own, I wondered if any living elements of this tradition still existed, because I was in the university library studying books written centuries ago, and here I was living in, now it was already 1999, and I had no idea if there was any, if it had died. Like, I thought maybe I'm studying a dead tradition. There was no way to know. And certainly in Vancouver, there was no way to know, because anybody I spoke to had no idea what I was talking about. It didn't matter where in the Jewish world. I said, you know, have you ever heard of Mussar? No. That was the end of the conversation. It was like, because I'm not evangelical, I wasn't trying to like preach to people. I was shaky enough as it was. I was just looking for myself. And so there was no Jewish bookstore in Vancouver. There still isn't. And so, and there was no internet. So I would send people out as my emissaries. I would say, if you're going to New York, or you're going to Baltimore, or you're going to Jerusalem, or you're going to London, go to a Jewish bookstore. Ask them for the Mussar section. It will be there. Any books written since 1900, in this century, bring them back and I'll pay you back. And so this was 1999. Someone brought me a book that was published in 1995. And it was called Navardic. That was the title of the book. And what that name means is that when the Mussar movement happened in 19th century Lithuania, there was a founder, Rabbi Israel Salanter, and then he had some key disciples, and each one gave the name to the school that he led, and it was named after the town where the institution was located. And Navardic is the name of a town. And so this was the Navardic School of Mussar, and somebody had written a book on it. That was interesting. I was glad to have that. It was written in English, which I needed because I didn't have Hebrew at that time. And what was most interesting to me was that at the front of the book were reproduced 2 little letters from rabbis who were saying the author of this book is an expert in the field, and it's an excellent book, and et cetera, giving the Good Housekeeping seal of approval to the book. And I figured, okay, this is a book about Mussar, about a traditional Mussar. This author went to these 2 people to get them to say that this is approvable. So these 2 people must be pretty senior to this guy who wrote the book, who was also a rabbi. And when they reproduced the letters in the book, they reproduced them actually on the letterhead that they had been written on, which meant that in the tiny top corner, there were 2 little phone numbers. And this was the link I had not had, to somebody who was living, who obviously knew something about Mussar, and who was accessible. Excuse me. So I phoned the first one, cold called, from Vancouver to Philadelphia. And I explained, I've been learning Mussar on my own for 2 years, and I wonder, is there anybody who's a living link to this tradition? Anybody for whom this is like a regular part of their life? And it was a complete miscommunication. Like, I said what I just said, I have no idea what he heard, because what he said back made no sense in relation to my question. Now I'm down to one phone number. Remember when I was reading the 2-volume set, I got back to the end of the book, and then I found Mussar. Now I'm down to 2 phone numbers. I'm down to 1 phone number. It's like the bottom of the 9th and 2 out. Because what do I do if this phone number doesn't, I don't know where I go next. But I called the second one, and I said the same thing. I've been learning Mussar on my own for 2 years in Vancouver, and I'm wondering, is there maybe somebody who might be, raised or steeped in the tradition, who might be someone I could talk to? And he said, wait, you've been learning Mussar on your own in Vancouver for 2 years? I said, yes. And he said, that's so inspiring. And I said, can I come and meet you? And he said, yes. And I said, when can I come? And he said, come to New York and phone me from there. Which is such a classic example of the kind of challenge that happens on a spiritual quest. That at some point you say, you have to walk over the bridge and you can't see the other end of the bridge. You have to step onto the bridge. You have to pay for the airplane fare all the way to New York to make a phone call. Right? And I did it. And he became my teacher, Rabbi Yechiel Yitzchak Per. And he died 2 years ago. And he was my guide for almost 25 years. And so I said there were 3 schools of Mussar. His father was raised in one of them, had been a student at the mother yeshiva in Europe of the Slobodka school, and he married a woman who was from the Navardic school, which is the name of that book. Not only was she in that family, her great-grandfather was the founder of Navardic Mussar. So he had all the lineage. He had the yichus, and he was a great individual as a teacher for me. I'll just tell you one anecdote, and then I'll change direction. When I went to meet him, so I went to set foot in this yeshiva. First time I'd ever been in a yeshiva in my life. I told you I spent 3 years in India. Hindu temples, poof, easy. I know what to do in a Hindu temple. What do you do in a yeshiva? I have no idea. So I walk in, and it's like everything else. I was like, I'm going to bumble through this. It's like it can't be fatal. So they show me in, and I wait, and then they show me into his office. So he's the Rosh Yeshiva. He's the head of the yeshiva. I'm some schmendrick from Vancouver. I thought, at that time I was clean shaven. I thought, maybe I should grow a beard. I'm going to yeshiva. And I thought to myself, right, that'll fool them, So I get in there, and he's sitting behind his desk, and he stands up to greet me. And I'm not short, but he's way taller than me. He was 6'4". And on top of that, literally on top of that, was a very tall black hat. And he had a very long beard. So I'm standing there, and he comes out from behind the desk. This like 2.5-foot head is approaching me. And he says, may I give you a kiss? And I said, yes. And he kissed me on the cheek. And we sat down. And then I began to ask questions, and he began to give answers. And then it rolled. And I had found myself a teacher who was connected to the Mussar tradition. So let me say something about Mussar, and then let me say something about my new book, which is and is not about Shabbat. So let that hang for a moment. So as Bonnie was saying, the essence of Mussar is focusing on your inner life as you experience it, which means that you can go back to a book of Mussar from the 15th century, and when they're talking about the inner experience of worry or envy or joy or patience or impatience or generosity or miserliness, and these are all the kinds of topics that show up in those books, you immediately recognize yourself in it. Because, as I said, a 16th century book, and I had in mind Orcha Tzadikim, which was from the 16th century. But there's no such thing as 16th century worry. There's worry, and you know it, and you know what it's like, and it's kind of the same for all of us. Worry is one of the only inner traits I don't need to define, right? We all know it. No one gives workshops in how to worry because we're all experts in it. Mark Twain said, I don't know why I'm talking about worry. Mark Twain said, worry must work because everything I worry about doesn't happen. So, but all that focus on the inner life. Now, there's one very significant piece here, very significant. I can't overemphasize how significant this is. That because we grew up in a Jewish world in which spirituality had no place, we don't have, and you may be an exception to this, but I've been doing a lot of traveling, a lot of talking, a lot of teaching, and also over 25 years. We don't have a feeling for what it means to be holy. Holiness. How many people, go through their day thinking about holiness or being holy or use that as a yardstick? And yet, if you come back to the Torah, which is the core of everything that exists in the Jewish world, holiness is our job description. It says, Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. It says, Anshe Kodesh tihiyu li, you shall be holy people to me. You shall sanctify yourself, etc., etc. In fact, it says it in the Torah 10 different ways, 10 different verses. Talk about becoming holy. And in fact, we just had, a few weeks ago, Parshat Kedoshim, which is holiness. Kedoshim is the name that the rabbis gave to that section of the Torah, in which the verse is, Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. And it also happened to be my granddaughter's bat mitzvah portion, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And so, yeah, thank you. So she said to me, she said, Zeta, will you help me write my Dvar Torah? How happy can I be? You have a granddaughter says, Zeta, will you help me write my Dvar Torah? Okay. And it happens to be something I know something about. And so I asked her, why do you think, I put it this way around, because she goes to a Jewish day school, so she actually knows something. So I said to her, what do you notice about the word Kedoshim? She thought about it. She said, it's in the plural. I said, right, it's in the plural. Why do you think? She thought about it. She said, because it applies to every individual. I said, right. And so that's the way the Torah puts it. Kedoshim tihiyu. It could say Goy Kadosh, and it does in some places, Am Kadosh, meaning a holy people or a holy nation. But most of the injunctions in the Torah, which is also valid, and imagine if we had a holy nation, then it's an incredible thought. It's enough, though, we should think about ourselves. And most of the instructions are directed to the individual. That the ultimate purpose of a human life is to rise up spiritually in the direction of holiness. Now, the verse continues because it says, Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohecha. You shall be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now that creates an interesting dilemma for us because we take the job, we're going to become holy, we're going to pursue holiness. How can I become what God is? How can I become godlike? So it's a dilemma, except that the way it gets resolved is that holiness is not a destination, it's an aspiration. It's not somewhere you get to. God got to that. We don't get to that. But it is our marker. It is our direction sign. It's the point or the marker on the horizon that we orient towards. And then that's the guideline. And it's interesting because before I wrote this book, I thought I would write a book on holiness. So I did a tremendous amount of research. I read so many books. By now I can read in Hebrew, I can translate. But what I found is even books that were ostensibly about holiness, or the chapter or the section was about holiness, the writer would talk about holiness for about 3 sentences and then stop talking about it. Because there's not that much you can say about holiness. What our tradition does is it mentions holiness as if to say, at the top of the mountain is holiness, and there's a path. Okay, you know there's holiness up there? Yeah, okay, let us pay attention to the path. Because, in fact, the metaphor of a mountain is a good one, because if you're walking up a mountain, you're not looking at the peak. If you're looking at the peak, there's a very good chance you're going to walk right off a cliff. When you walk up a mountain, you look at your feet. Rocks, roots, cliffs, whatever you're looking for. The journey upward is done by looking down. And so you find that even though they all endorse, I mean, I'm talking about the writers in our tradition, everybody endorses we're on a journey to holiness. We are souls on a journey towards holiness. And then everyone stops talking about holiness, and that's why I couldn't write a book on holiness, and starts focusing on the inner being who is on that journey towards holiness. Because it's the step-by-step journey that is the only thing that's going to get you there. So, and what can we know about a quality of God? Rav Kook, who was a great teacher in the early 20th century, died in 1936, I think. And he was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. And his secretary said to him, Rebbe, what is holiness? And Rav Kook answered, holiness is the quality of the holy. Which says nothing, and it does actually say something. What it says is that you can't define it. Rav Kook couldn't define it. If Rav Kook can't define it, I'm not looking. I don't have an aspiration to do that. But it's because we can't say anything about it because it's a divine quality. But because it's a godly quality, we set it up here because we have within us elements of godly potential. And now let's forget about it. Because the whole journey is the path. The whole point is the path. The moment-to-moment experience is of the step-by-step progression. And what the Mussar teachers identified is that these inner traits that I've been throwing out and that Bonnie referred to as well, that's the path. The path is generosity. The path is kindness. The path is compassion. The path is all the inner experiences. And I say all the inner experiences because unlike our Christian neighbors, Judaism does not have a sense of virtues and vices. You know, Christians have a sense of 7 deadly sins, right? They're all inner qualities like anger and envy and what in the Jewish world are called midot. Midah means trait of character, and midot is the plural. And so all these inner traits are traits of character, and in the Christian world they're divided up between the 7 cardinal virtues and the 7 deadly sins. And the Jews look at it and say, those ones that you say are so bad, they're not so bad. And those ones that you say are so good, they're not always good. For example, what's the positive side of envy? Envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. What's the positive side of envy?
Ambition,
I said ambition.
Ambition, sure, ambition. Or motivation, or, you know, that you look at someone else who is really, you know, equal to you, let's say, or maybe less than you in terms of how you assess their talents and their capabilities, and they accomplish something. And you say, if that person could accomplish it, you know, I'm envious of that, I'm going to work harder. And I'm going to, you know, envy is not so bad. And on the other side of the ledger, can you do harm with generosity? It's not always a virtue. Like, what? Spoil a child? Yeah, spoil a child. It's a perfect example. Or enable negative behavior or create dependency. I mean, you can do tremendous negativity with generosity. So what the Jewish world realized is that patience is a virtue sometimes. Generosity is a virtue sometimes. Envy is a virtue sometimes. And all of them also can be negative. That's the Jewish view. And so it's interesting. It's very distinctive because what we know is that we all have all the traits. Anybody here never been angry? Right. Anybody here never tell a lie? And if anyone puts up their hand, I'm just saying that's not the first time. You know, and we've all done kind things and we've all done unkind things. And we've all been generous and we've all at times not been generous. And that's the way it is. That's the human being in the inner life. That's our makeup. We all have all these inner traits. And they have significance because they're the pathway to holiness. So it's not just, you know, improve that trait and people will like you better. That's probably going to be true, but that's not its ultimate purpose. Its ultimate purpose is spiritual elevation, which is, again, you know, language that I certainly didn't grow up with in the Jewish world, but is there in our tradition and speaks to me. And I think, given the fact that you schlepped me down here, maybe it speaks to you too. What makes a trait significant in you is its measure, whether it is tending towards an extreme in either direction. That's when it shows up on your curriculum. And each of us has a curriculum. We have it now. Each of us has certain inner traits, which, as my teacher would say, using his kind of language, you have more potential to grow in that trait. There is no specific measure that is general. There is a measure for you. And the word midah, which is translated as character trait, comes from the verb limdod, which means to measure. So in the Hebrew of character traits, it's telling us the issue of a character trait is not the trait itself. There's times to be angry. But if you're raging all the time, that's an extreme. And that is a spiritual obstacle. That's on your curriculum. You are being told by life, your path to holiness involves dealing with your anger, or your impatience, or your extreme generosity. Because, you know, you have to pull it back, or maybe you're miserly, maybe you're tight-fisted, and you have to loosen up. It's very particular to the individual, not the traits. But each of us has them differently calibrated in us. And when the trait is tending to either extreme, it's equal as an obstacle. To be really tight-handed, or to be, as the word is, profligate. You know, many people know that there's a minimum amount that a Jew is supposed to give in tzedakah, which is, you know, 10%. But very few people know that there's a maximum, which is 20%. Because, and what the rabbis say is, you shouldn't give away so much that you then become the person who needs to be taken care of by charity. But there's also a matter of balance. Like, why are you giving away so much? There was a story, it was in the New York Times magazine a few years ago, about a guy who did an incredibly generous thing. He gave one of his kidneys anonymously as a donor. He was an anonymous kidney donor. Amazingly generous thing to do. Definitely fits under the category of generosity. He was so moved by that, he said, there was no reason somebody should be on dialysis when I have 2 healthy kidneys. I can do fine with 1 kidney, and someone else is going to have their life saved. He felt so good about that. He said, I don't see why someone else should be on dialysis when I can be on dialysis. So he wanted to give away his 2nd kidney. Of course, no ethical doctor would do that, but that's an example of meshuggah generosity, right? Like, not balanced. And so it's off at the extreme. It doesn't matter which trait you take. Pick any trait. Pick generosity, pick humility, pick kindness, pick laziness, pick anything. One extreme, laziness. One extreme, hyperactivity. Pull back from laziness and you get another mark on the graph where it says, so laziness out there, restful. You know, takes rest, paces yourself. On the other side, you've got hyperactive, but here you pull back and you've got enthusiastic, or the word that's often used in the English translations of Mussar books. It's a nice word, but we don't use it very much. Alacrity. It's a nice word, alacrity. So anything around the middle range, because we're all different, there's no single point, it's contextual, it changes, but around the middle range, it's not an obstacle in your spiritual path. It's not a boulder on the road. But if you can find in yourself that you tend to tell lies just, at the drop of a hat, or you are so truthful that it hurts people. My wife is retired now, but when she was working, she was a palliative care physician. She had to be very judicious in what she told people. Not everybody wants the medical facts and the whole truth. They want their own version because they're getting news that they have to be able to handle. She had to learn how to, in a sense, not tell the truth, not tell the whole truth. That doesn't mean she's lying. It means she's not compulsively telling the truth. So that gives us a spiritual curriculum, and you've got yours. And the wonderful thing is, if you accept that you have this trait that's on your curriculum, you can grow in that area, you recognize that, then you can work on it and you can change. Because it's a fundamental principle of Judaism that people can change. And that's not true of other religions, not all of them. But you believe it because that's entirely the focus of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Personal change. So now the rabbi's not here unless she's hiding. Oh, she's here. Hey, what are you doing to me? Now I'm looking there, now I'm looking there.
I was dealing with sound stuff.
Okay. No, because I was going to ask your forgiveness for what I'm about to say. Yeah. Which is that if you don't think you can change, don't bother coming on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is all about the inner commitment to look back, see what you did, express regret, make amends, recognize it, see it as your curriculum, change and grow. And if you don't think you can change, what's going to happen is the same tests that keep showing up in your life will just keep repeating. So impatient people find long lineups wherever they go. It's a wonderful piece of choreography. I don't know who pulls that off. I used to say, all it takes for an impatient person to become impatient is having one person in line up before them. And someone said, no, they don't need one. The barista's too slow. And if you see it as your curriculum, you can work on it, you can change, you can grow, you can take another step up the mountain. And the way it works with climbing a mountain, every so often you get to a vista point and you look out over the land. And then you go back to watching your feet and trudge up, and the path takes you up, and you're up higher, and there's another vista point, and you see a different view of the land. You see more of it. You see a bigger vision. And then you keep going up. And again, you see more. You become wiser. You see more of the lay of the land. And that's how we're living. So if you see that you've got impatience on your curriculum and you work on it and you change, you will not be impatient anymore. If you don't work on it, you'll just keep running into long lineups. And further, you will not recognize that this is something you have something to do with. Impatient? I'm not impatient. You're too slow. Everybody I meet, just too slow, right? If people would only do their jobs, right? If they would only do it the way I know how it ought to be done. So impatience is understood to be a branch of egotism. It's all about me. And so if you begin to learn about it and see it and take it on, practice and change and grow, life keeps laying itself out in greater and greater clarity. And if you don't, you just keep running into slow people who don't know how to do their jobs. Everywhere you go, that's just your life. That's the world you created for yourself. And there they are. Every nudnik, I spent a lot of time driving today. And there's only two kinds of drivers, idiots and morons. idiots drive faster than me, and morons drive slower than me. So if I'm behind someone, come on, moron, get going. Or someone zooms around me, what an idiot, you know. But because that's the problem, is if you see, it's not me. It has nothing to do with me. It's all them. And then you won't grow. There's no growth in that. So the Mussar teachers developed that paradigm, and then they really played it out. They really looked into what's involved in those traits. If we had more time, I'd take you into some examples to say, how do you know what patience is? How do you know what joy is? That's a real question. How do you know? It's an interesting question to ask yourself. Where did you get your definition from? Now, when you think that our sages for the last 1,100 years have been focused on us and these very questions, looking into what the tradition has to say is very informative. It's not common sense. It's not. It's not common sense. It's acquired wisdom and acquired understanding. So that really created the path of Mussar. And of course, it was very valid and relevant every generation as it went along, because every issue that I talked about, whether miserliness or impatience or arrogance or whatever, it was there in every generation, right? So certain wise people examined life, including their own, and wrote it down and passed it on. And the next generation picked it up. And they learned from that book. And if it was a worthy book, they passed it on. And then they added books of their own. And the diamond of the tradition kept getting polished and polished and polished over 1,100 years. Because, you know, the Jews are not stupid. We're not stupid people. Everybody knows we're not stupid. The anti-Semites give us credit for being smarter than we are, because they say we're capable of running the world. Anybody who has been on a synagogue board of directors knows that we are not capable of running the world. So they're giving us credit for being brighter than we are. But we're bright enough that if a book came into our generation and we did not find it truthful and accurate and useful, we would not have passed it on to our children. And this tradition got passed generation after generation for 1,100 years. And so, as I later discovered, with no break. It got very narrowed because of the Holocaust and because the Jewish world in North America made the decision to turn away from spirituality and to endeavor to assimilate as much as possible. And so when we tried to assimilate and become as much like our non-Jewish neighbors as possible, the inner life was one of the things that we let go by the wayside. So that's what Mussar is. And it's a body of practices. It's information and it's practices, and especially in the 19th century, they developed practices. And so in the Mussar Institute, we do courses which have practices involved, journaling and chanting and meditations and contemplations, and lots of interaction with other people, talking things through, learning about yourself by talking with other people. It's a whole program that we inherited of inner cultivation. One other thing that got really demoted because of our attempt to assimilate was Shabbat. Because as the world at large experienced Shabbat as a weekend day, another weekend day, so did we begin to experience it as another weekend day. And it comes back, it circles around to what I was saying earlier, because what makes Shabbat special is holiness. So we're back to our deficit quality. The deficit quality that shows up when we're trying to understand our inner lives, and the deficit quality when we're trying to understand time and passage of time through the weeks and the months and the years. Because the Torah says when God, on the seventh day, when the seventh day came, God blessed it and sanctified it. So right from the moment of creation, it's interesting, none of the other 6 days were sanctified. The seventh day was singled out for holiness. And again, that seems to be reflective of the fact that we were not making that spiritual quality or any spiritual qualities a priority in life. And so Saturday became the day after Friday and the day before Sunday. And if we did something, if we still had any vestigial attention to it, it was very much pared down and very often into formalities. Light the candles, maybe say a blessing, maybe have a challah, maybe go to temple, maybe. But in terms of, if you start from the, I am creating a holy day for myself. Better still, I am aligning with the original holiness of this day. I am living a day from Friday evening to Saturday evening where this day is holy. How aligned am I to that quality? And that is such a different approach. Now, I didn't grow up with anything like that. My Saturdays at home, my father would inevitably, I would find him asleep on the couch with bowling on television, which is probably what bowling on television was good for, which is putting you to sleep. But there was no religion and no spirituality in our household, and I don't fault them for that. They were part of a generation that had other priorities that they really felt they needed to attend to. But as my spiritual journey continued, I began to see the need for a holiness day, a day that was carved out. Because someone said, I think maybe it was you, Bonnie, or maybe you, Rabbi, said in the introduction, oh no, it was you, Bonnie, talking about Shabbat, bringing Shabbat into your life. Because think of this, think of how we fill the 6 days of the week. And you know, I say we filled. Think how other people fill our 6 days of the week. Think what they're pouring into our lives. No other generation has had smartphones, which are like pipelines into our lives. And so many different groups with their own interests are very, very committed to pouring things into that pipeline and pouring them into us. And billions of dollars are spent, whether it's advertisers or political parties or influencers or educational institutions or conspiracy theorists. There's a massive commitment to filling your life with their stuff, not in your interests, in their interests. And that's our reality. How many people will say here that the stuff that you get through your cell phone fits the definition of holiness? Not that, not even close. Mundane would be nice. You know, just neutral. But we live in a very polluted era, psychically and spiritually, very polluted. You know, the standards of public discourse, you keep thinking they can't go lower, and they do. And the way, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go on at length. We're all living that experience of how difficult it is. We didn't see this coming. You know, we didn't see that life would turn in this direction, and it has. We thought anti-Semitism was in the past, right? We thought. In fact, that, in my view, that's one of the reasons I think the Jews chose to assimilate as much as we did. If we could just fade in, that takes care of anti-Semitism, doesn't it? Just didn't work. But we gave up, we made all the sacrifices, we just didn't get the prize because we gave up Shabbat. We gave up the holiness of the day. And we gave up because holiness didn't mean anything to us. Spirituality didn't mean anything to us. Getting into Harvard, that meant something. You know, getting a good job at the right law firm, that meant something. You know, becoming a doctor, that meant something. You know what I'm saying? We became really, we invested in the American dream. And so what's holiness? Where does that fit? Except when the dream starts to feel not quite so ideal anymore. I find myself, I come back to being a Jew, and what does Judaism have to say? And it points me in a completely different direction. It points me in the direction of holiness. And so this idea of a holy day, I'm just going to say two more things, and then I'll open it up for questions. The idea of a holy day is the idea of alignment. So I didn't grow up with this. So my wife and I, we've been together a long time. We got married when we were 23 years old. So it's been a joint journey. Usually me pulling and her getting schlepped. But I said, I think we should start lighting candles on Friday night. And she said, okay. She'd been along on the journey, and she kind of got why that was a nice step. So we started to light candles on Friday night. And we would light candles when she finished work. She was a physician, a palliative care physician, and so she would see patients during the day, and then she would write on the charts. And she wasn't ready for Shabbat until she had finished writing the charts. It was an emotional need of hers to be able to say, I'm done. I'm finished. I can put it down now. Now I can go into this other day with this other, aroma. So we did that for quite a few months. And then something wasn't sitting right with me. And I kept thinking about it and working on it and thinking and talking to my teacher. And then it struck me, and I said to her, Bev, we're doing this completely backwards. This is wrong. This is nuts, actually, because we're lighting Shabbat candles 2 hours after sunset, half an hour before sunset, 36 minutes, like just randomly, because it all depends on when you write in your charts. But actually, there is a time related to sunset, which is the time, and it's related to sunset because it's about the relationship of the earth to the sun, and the earth revolving around the sun and rotating on its axis, and which season it is, and the sun goes down just at that moment because that's the moment in this giant cosmic rhythm. And if you light the Shabbos candles at the right time, you're aligning with all of that. It's clear. That's what determines it. That's the pattern. But not in our house. We're lighting based on your charts, which is your work life. Instead of the cosmic rhythms, we're aligning to your work life. It's backwards. The work life is the 6 days of the week, and then you realign with the deeper resonant rhythms of life in the entire cosmos. So then we fought. Then we fought because she had an emotional need, and it was hard for her. But what we realized through that, and the reason I'm telling you this story, and this is really related to the book, I don't tell this story in the book, but it has to do with aligning yourself. And then what she saw was that when she switched over, what the difficulty was that she was being asked to be the master of her work rather than allowing the work to be the master of her. Because as long as she was compelled to finish her work, then it was the master. If at the right moment she could say, I'm putting you down, she's the master. And so she learned to master her work. And then when you do that, that skill, that inner strength, that release is something you can do on Tuesday and Thursday as well. And that's the Shabbat effect. That's what I'm talking about in the book. I list 8 inner qualities which are particularly appropriate to cultivate on this one day, because where else in your life are you working out? I'm talking about working on rest. It says on the 7th day, God didn't create anything, and Rashi, the commentator, said, oh yeah, God created rest. Like it didn't exist. It's not just the absence of labor. You have to work at resting. There's a story about a rabbi who was in Hong Kong. There were very high buildings. So it was Shabbat. So he was climbing up the stairs. And he was like on the 16th floor. He was huffing and puffing and sweating. And one of the staff in the hotel said, sir, why don't you take the elevator? He said, I can't. It's my day of rest. Rest, peace, joy, material satisfaction, which I call enoughness. Enough. No more acquisition. Enough. And so on. Awareness. These are valuable human qualities, and in the 6 days of the week, we almost pay no attention to them. We're lucky if they come our way. But Shabbat is set up as a laboratory and a workshop, and the outcome is you become a person who knows how to rest. You become a person who knows how to experience joy. You become a person who knows how to experience peace and awareness. That's what gets cultivated on the 7th day. And that spills over and becomes the Shabbat effect, and you become a more peaceful person, a more aware person, and so on. That's the way the book is about Shabbat. And I'll just say a word about how it's not about Shabbat. Because this is my 5th book in the area of Mussar. All the 4 previous ones focused only on the spiritual tradition, only on Mussar, not on the Jewish religious tradition. I wasn't very interested in it. I was interested in understanding and taking a hand in cultivating my own inner life. But as I went along, just as the story about Shabbat, I began to see other technologies in the Jewish world as part of one global whole. Prayer, study, Mussar, all the other aspects, the holidays, everything, the Siddur. It's one integrated whole. It's one piece of cloth. I began to understand that. But then I was challenged. Because what's the relationship between religious practice and spiritual life? Many people say, I'm spiritual. You know, I don't go to synagogue, I don't go to church, I go out into the forest and I have my communing experience there, and that's my spirituality. And then there are other people for whom, you know, they're religious practitioners with a checklist. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, done. So how do the two things integrate? And what I came to see, and this is just very synoptic, is that when a person says, I'm spiritual because they go after spiritual experiences, that's not of great interest in the Jewish world or in Jewish thought. What's of interest in Jewish thought is not spiritual experience, but having a spiritual life. And when you have a spiritual life, or a structure that gives you a spiritual life, that's part of the path up the mountain. It's a discipline. It's a pathway. And some of the stuff on that pathway is not like getting off on a high spiritual experience. It's like going to visit the sick, or it's going to a Shiva house, or it's giving tzedakah, or it's just things that a spiritual life requires that are not necessarily spiritual experiences. Kindness, chesed. We think of kindness as being a feeling. Not in Judaism, it's an action. Chesed is something you do. You may feel resentment. You don't like the person. You don't want to do this. You'd rather be doing something, and you do it, that's an act of kindness. Even though you're like, inside, you did it, it's kindness. So the whole structure of Jewish practice, including prayer, including the high holidays, including all the holidays, etc., is part of the technology that works in conjunction with the inner life to create that process that takes you higher and higher up the mountain. And I'm going to close by giving you an image that I actually do give in the book. When we begin Shabbat, we raise a cup of wine and we say a blessing over the wine. The poor cup gets no mention whatsoever. But you can't make Kiddush without a cup. Now, Kiddush is from the same root as Kiddushim, as Kedusha is holiness. We're raising the cup to sanctify, and all the blessing is over the wine. Borei Pri Hagafen, right? What does wine represent? Wine represents the spiritual. Not just the spiritual, but the transformation of spirit. Because it starts out as grape juice, and then it's transformed, and it becomes wine. And wine is at a much higher level than grape juice. It smells more beautifully. It is so beautifully colored. It tastes way more subtle and layered than grape juice does. And you know it's at a higher level because it costs 10 times more than grape juice. But then it's also alcoholic. It's transformed. And it's liquid. It's not solid. It just represents the spiritual so nicely. And the cup is religious practice. The cup is the discipline. The cup is the hard form. The cup is the vessel that holds the spiritual. And you can't get the spiritual without the cup. The cup is not the point. We make the blessing over the wine, not the cup. But you can't do it without a cup. Can you imagine someone taking a bottle of wine and going, and then making a bracha? not so crude. Okay, they take a straw and they put a straw in. You can't do that. And not only that, according to halakha, Jewish law, you can't make kiddush over a cracked cup, even though it'll hold liquid, or a broken cup, even though it'll hold liquid. And if you have a disposable plastic cup that's gorgeous and a plain old teacup, the teacup is preferable. Why? Firm boundaries, firm vessel to hold the spiritual. So I've come to see 25 years on in this journey that the relationship between the spiritual and the structured is essential, and that spiritual growth and moving your way up that mountain is a matter of having that kind of spiritual structure and practice. And so that applies to Shabbat as well, because the firm boundaries are what keep out the other things that go on the other 6 days of the week. And when we do that in our lives, or when we do that on Shabbat, we raise the possibility of holiness actually being not just an aspiration, not a destination, but something that we taste more and more and more as we continue on our journey. And as I've been ending all my talks on this tour, Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so now it's your turn. Questions, comments? Bonnie has a microphone. There's one here from Barak.
Alan? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Really beautiful.
You can stop there.
I recently listened to a podcast, an interview. Ezra Klein interviewed Pema, I think her name is Chodoro.
Chodron. Pema Chodron.
Chodro, a Buddhist nun.
Yeah.
And she talked about how there was a zone of, everyone has a zone of comfort and a zone of discomfort. And I didn't realize that she was expressing a Rashi correlate until your talk. But, and what she said is that the zone of comfort is really important. It sustains us. But the zone of discomfort is where we grow.
Right. And that was true in my life. I mean, I never would have discovered Mussar. I would never gone on that journey except that discomfort. It says in the Torah, in the 5 books, it uses one metaphor twice, the metaphor of circumcision of the heart, which is clearly a metaphor of spiritual initiation, because it's talking about the heart. It's not a physical thing. And we've all had those experiences where you feel like your heart is broken open, and it's a growth experience. But it says it twice. Once it says you will circumcise your heart, and the other time it says God will circumcise the foreskin of your heart. And that seems to be an accurate representation of how life is. We can bring about a certain amount of change because we put ourselves out of the comfort zone. We stretch. And we do it because we know it's good for us. And every so often, we also get a 2x4 across the back of the head. We get God whacks us because bereavement, betrayal, failure, disappointment, it just comes. And as somebody once said, a catastrophe is too good a thing to waste. And so, and we look back and we say, that was a terrible experience, but I grew so much, you know?
Or Mussar?
Yes. Is it Shabbat or Shabbos? When I pitched my book to my publisher, I pitched it as the Sabbath Effect. But I knew I wasn't going to stay with that. It was just because it's a secular publisher, so I really wanted it to be the Shabbos Effect. But we settled on the Shabbat Effect. We met halfway.
I think you may have just answered my question, but I was I wanted you to come back to the beginning of your talk when you were saying, I had this, what sounds like a catastrophe, and how did this learning help you?
Oh, it helped tremendously because, number one, it gave me a framework for taking responsibility, which wasn't, oh, you're a bad person, right? It wasn't, oh, you did something bad, oh, you made a mistake. It turns it entirely around into a positive thing. You have more potential to grow in that area. This is where your future lies if you make it. This is just a test. And if you work on it, you're going to pass that test. You may have failed the test this time, but learn from that. There was I mentioned Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, who was a teacher who died in 2005. But he was a product of the pre-war Lithuanian yeshiva, so he was really steeped in the Mussar tradition. And he said that what his main teaching was that everybody should be learning from their own experience. And he had a word for it, hislamdus, hitlamdut, which means to teach yourself. It's a reflexive form of the verb limud or lilamed. And he said, even a person who's on their deathbed should not just be dying, they should be learning how to die. And so he was so, he believed that that's what a life is meant to be, learn from it. And I didn't have that model at all. That wasn't a paradigm I had. I was just trying to succeed. Success was my paradigm. And then suddenly I had, ooh, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this?
Well, before the next question comes, just 2 points. Folks who are online, I know a few of you said you were going to text me if you had any questions, so now would be a good time to do that, and that is why I'm checking my phone. And the second thing is, if you're going to use this microphone, remember this is the microphone you have to swallow for people to be able to hear.
For a very stimulating, I feel like I've been asleep for about 60 years and I'm slowly beginning to wake up. So thank you
That's
for
funny because Rev Yerucham Levovitz said his yortzeit is next Wednesday, and I was looking up some of the stuff about him, and he said, most people are asleep with their eyes open.
The principles you talk about in many ways are universalist sort of values that as we look at a lot of self-help or Eastern philosophies, those principles there. So help me better understand the Jewish piece of this thing.
So there's two answers to that. One I alluded to, but I didn't want to spend time on because I felt this session was getting long. I said that over 1,100 years, our teachers developed specific understandings of each of the inner traits that are not common sense. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to give you a quiz. How many times did I mention patience in this talk, right? And not one person put up their hand asking me for a definition. But here's two possibilities. Patience is you're being delayed on whatever it is you want to do. The biggest, longest freight train in the world is going across the road, and you're there, and it's shunting back and forth. And you're fine with that. However long it takes, it's okay. I'll be calm through this. I'm being patient. I'm waiting, however long, and then I'll be on my way. That's one possibility. Another possibility is somebody, again, is thwarting your attempt. Your agenda's being interrupted, you're being blocked, and you want to kill somebody, but you don't. So it's self-restraint. In the one image, you're not worked up at all. In the other one, you got steam coming out of your ears, but you don't act it out. Which one is patience? Put all those for number one. Okay, there's a handful. Number two? Okay, the majority went with number two. So what do you think the Hebrew says? What? No, that's the other option that people often come up with, both. No, the Hebrew is very specific.
You have to suffer.
That's right. How do you know that? Oh, no, this is buried into the Hebrew. She's onto something.
It's savlanut, which is based on the root lisbol, to suffer.
Right. Sivlot are sufferings as a noun. So the word savlanut, which is the Hebrew word for patience, which if you've been to Israel, you'll know, is the least useful word in Israel of all the vocabulary. But savlanut is built out of the same consonants as sivlot or lisbol. which means to suffer. So already you're getting a clue, but you get even more than that. Do you know what a sabal is in Hebrew? Sabal. A sabal is a porter. The guy with the red cap who carries your bags comes from the same root as suffering and patience. Why? Because patience is the ability to bear your suffering. You're the porter. What that experience really is, it's not an external thing, it's an internal thing. It's that those raging feelings, you can hold them. You can create a vessel internally to hold them. That's buried right into Hebrew. And there's many other things like that where you see that there is a specific Jewish understanding, the difference between happiness and joy. That's also been worked out. Happiness is when you get something you want. Joy transcends anything you want. Joy comes as a wave that just washes through you. It's not about getting something or achieving something or having something. It's just a human experience of washing through. And the word for joy is gila, which comes from the Hebrew root gal, which means wave. It's named as a wave. And so that's one. There's the Jewish understanding of generosity, of humility. Humility is a huge thing. Who in the Torah is named as the most humble person on the face of the earth? Moses. How did I figure what do you understand about humility? Moses was the most humble person on the face of the earth. If you look in the dictionary, it gives synonyms, meek and diffident. Moses was not either of those things. So we've got our own understandings. The second thing is, and this I did talk about, the goal of holiness is a specifically Jewish goal. If you look at Hinduism or Buddhism, they have goals about not being reborn, or about enlightenment, or about being nirvana and samadhi and just all these other things that Judaism doesn't align with. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz said, and I quoted him many times, but I can only paraphrase it. He says, "The person on whom a great light shines, who feels they have come to the end of the road, who has reached life's potential, from the Jewish point of view, has lost their way." So there's the goal, and then also these understandings within. Yes?
So one of the ways that I think that the toxic side of American culture absorbs mindfulness practices is by reinforcing individualism and like creating palliatives to the pain of living in a society that is deeply unequal.
Among other things.
Among other things. And so I'm just wondering how you think about that with respect to the Mussar practice and like a Shabbat practice.
Well, number one, I think it's really important to recognize how much this culture does enforce distraction, right? So, the fact that the University of Michigan has a 120,000 seat football stadium, and I don't think there's a synagogue that big. I don't think there's a church that big. I think that, college football and the whole realm of sports and entertainment and celebrities but which film won the Oscar for Best Picture 2 years ago? What? I have no idea. And was that last year? I don't know. But the point is, among all of us who at the time would have known, within a very short period of time, that information just disappears. It's saying in Hebrew, hevel, it's missed. And so much of this culture is devoted to that and focusing on elsewhere and not in here. And so it creates no awareness whatsoever. It creates complete obliviousness to our own inner experience and our own values. You talk about mindfulness practice. Mindfulness practice is meant to develop awareness. The interesting thing, so I'm I'm very familiar with Buddhist meditation practice. In my 3 years in India, I did plenty. My first meditation teacher was the meditation teacher of the Dalai Lama in the 1970s. So I know what I have a ground to stand on with that. And so Jewish mindfulness practice is really Buddhist practice dressed up in tallis and tefillin. But the Jewish version of mindfulness practice, you see it on Shabbat because there are these lines that you have to have awareness not to cross. You have to be very mindful. 6 days a week, the light goes on, the light goes off. You don't think about it, but I have to stop myself. And all the practices of Shabbat that keep those other 6 days at bay are mindfulness practices. So on my tour, I went to Pasadena, California. And I was staying with someone who is a student of the Mussar Institute, lovely woman, and but not observing Shabbat, not keeping kosher, none of that. And I was going to be there over Shabbat, her guest. So she said, I don't know how to do this. I said, don't worry, I'll help you. So first thing we'll do, we'll take all the food by takeout. We'll go to the kosher deli, we'll bring home food. Okay. But there's a couple things you can bake. If you wrap potatoes in a double wrapping of tin foil, aluminum foil, or yams, sweet potatoes, you can cook those in a non-kosher oven as long as there's 2 levels of aluminum foil. Fine. So she puts in potatoes and sweet potatoes, and we go out and do some errands. We come back, non-kosher oven, and she opens the oven. She wants to see if they're done. So she takes out one potato, and she picks up a knife, and she sticks it into the potato. So, of course, it's a non-kosher knife. So I don't say anything. Why? Because there's 6 more potatoes. I'm not worried about that one potato. So then she said, I can't tell. So she picks up another potato. She's got the knife. And this time I said, Diana, it's not a kosher knife, and that's a kosher potato. Oh, she said, okay. So I had told her, because part of making it even easy for us is we would have no meat. So it was going to be a milchix dinner. And I said to her, we're going to have challah. If you take the butter out of the fridge earlier, it'll be soft and easier to spread on the challah. So then I said to her, did you take the butter out of the fridge? She said, yes. She said, but I'm not sure it's soft. So she takes the butter, she picks up the same knife. If that's not a mindfulness practice, I don't know what is. And she was so taken by that. So every Sunday I put out a blog, and she said, I want to write your blog this week. I want to talk about my experience of how things like baking potatoes and the knife are instruments of mindful practice so intrinsically built into the structure of Shabbat. That and so many other things.
Hi, thank you for being here with us. I have 2 short questions. One, what is the root of Mussar? What is the shoresh? And I want to know what other words share that shoresh. And 2, how did you use Mussar in your drive down here to help with your frustration?
Yeah.
How did you use it in the real world?
Okay.
Thank you.
No, it is a real world practice because just Judaism doesn't have monasteries, it doesn't have monks, it doesn't have people living in caves. We don't do that. We live in the real world, so a spiritual practice has to be in the real world. There's debate about the shoresh, the root of the Hebrew word musar. So it's mem samach resh. So other words that come from the same root are masoret, which means tradition, or limsor, which means to hand off. And so you can see there is a connection there, but handing off a tradition, And that's exactly how it was. It got handed from generation to generation, just as I'm doing now. I felt bereft, but when I said to Rabbi Pear, my teacher at one point, I said, I've learned so much. I'm thinking of writing a book. And he said, you're thinking of writing a book. You're obligated to write a book, he said. But because you can't just take it in and keep it for yourself. The idea is limsor, to pass on. But there's another root which was in the same root as, let me think, how does it go? Oh, Yisurin. Yisurin is, again, suffering. So there are people who associate the word Mussar with Yisurin, or Yisur, which means to suffer, because often that's what it takes to make you wake up. That this is in that category and coming out of that. So I tend to prefer the former. I was just letting you know because there's no guarantee. But the book of Proverbs opens this way. I am Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, and I have come to teach you Chokhmah u'Mussar, wisdom and Mussar. That's the first occurrence of that word in Jewish sources, but it's the Torah, and the word Mussar is there. Now, you know, Solomon was known as the most wise of all people, right? Wise King Solomon. Why did he come to teach us wisdom and Mussar? Because you can't teach wisdom. You can't teach wisdom. You have to teach a pathway, and if the person follows it, they will develop wisdom. And so it goes back that far, and I think that also reflects the idea of a transmission that goes on. How did I use it coming down? I think it was pretty much all about patience. And there was an element of trust, too. I came down, when I left Vancouver, I had a plan that I would do this, this, and this. And then as I drove down, each of those ones got abandoned. Like, I'm not doing that until, like I was following my GPS, and I kept changing the destination on the go because I kept changing the plan, because I kept seeing what was real. So what's in there? Responsibility, achrayut. The word achrayut in Hebrew, there's a debate of whether that, which means responsibility, achrayus, comes from the word acher, which means after, or achar. No, achar, which means after, or acher means other. So those two Hebrew words are very similar, other and after. But both of them are about responsibility. Responsibility to the other person and responsibility for what happens next. So I was acting on both those definitions because I wanted to be here on time. Seder, order. I was having to keep things in order because, and I had to pay attention to the order of traffic because if that lane was moving faster, I needed to be over there and I had to stay awake. And patience, and then also I think consideration, because I was very aware of the people. I phoned ahead to Bonnie to tell Marlene, who I'm staying with, that I was going to be late. I was changing the plan. So I was working on all that at the time. I'll tell you one little thing about Rav Yerucham Levovitz, whose yortzeit is on Wednesday, a week today. He said, did I tell you this about baking matzah? No, okay. Must have been one of the other 44 cities. He said, if you see someone baking matzah, and you say to that person, what are you doing? And the person says, I'm baking matzah. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is, I'm working on patience, precision, alacrity, and that's what I'm working on. I happen to be baking matzah, but what I'm really doing is working on myself. So the same with driving down here. I mean, I'm ostensibly driving to this session, but really I'm just working on myself because every time, every instance, every situation is an opportunity to work on yourself. Okay.
I think we're going to stop the questions here because we have a ton of food and I want to make sure that people eat.
And we have books that I'm happy to
We have books
sign.
and book signing and plenty of food in the social hall, and there's some sort of obligation along the way that to eat, I'm sure.
That's the other answer to the question. Somebody said to me, what's Jewish about Mussar? I say, everywhere I teach it, there's food.
One of my teachers said, no meetin', no eatin'.
Yeah.
No, sorry, no eatin', no
No
meetin'.
meeting, yeah. I can't get this off.
So please help me thank Dr. Morinis for his time here.
Thank you.
Are you on?
I should be on.
But thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sally.
And thank you to Bonnie as well, again, for organizing all of this and making sure that we could have this wonderful evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.